if you understand the logistics of retail anthropology and you understand the mindset of the consumer, you can tailor your brand to that consumer, to that desired consumer, without compromising your authenticity. So that all is part of the larger ecosystem of fashion retail. Absolutely.
Hi, and welcome to Handbag Designer 101, the podcast with your host, Emily Blumenthal, handbag industry expert and the handbag fairy godmother. Each week, we uncover the stories behind the handbags we love, from the iconic brands and top designers to the creativity, craftsmanship, and culture that define the handbag world. Whether you're a designer, collector, or simply passionate about handbags, this is your front row seat to it all. Welcome, Bernadette Giacomazzo to Handbag Designer 101, the podcast. Bernadette, you are a journalist for Retail Wire, Dear Media, and the CEO, it's G-Force Media. Huzzah.
G-Force Marketing and Publicity. Yes, ma'am.
G-Force Marketing and Publicity. Yes. I was so close. We connected because I featured one of your articles in my entrepreneurship class, and like all other famous relationships, then we became friends on LinkedIn.
Yes.
Because that's where grown-ups are.
Yes. Allegedly, we're grown-up.
Oh, my God.
I'm hoping to get there someday.
Oh, girl, you and me both. I always say I'm screwed once I start looking my age. So I got a lot to cover. Someone I know was asking, like, what are you going to do when you retire? I'm like, I have so much to get done before I get there. So I'll keep you posted. Jesus Christ. Oh, my gosh. So we were just chatting before. You were talking about the evolution of media. And nowadays, like anybody else, in order to be a quote unquote famed journalist that people will want to hire as a freelance, you need to be a full 360 package. You need to have brands with fans and people wanting to read you, just like anything that if your articles are going to take real estate, the publications want to make sure people will follow you. That is stressful, but I would love to dive in terms of how all this fits into the retail landscape and, you know, how what you write is so unique right now because the market is so upside down.
Mm-hmm. How does it tie into the retail landscape? I think you have to look at it just really as evolution. The very basis of evolution is, whether you believe in the theory or not, if you don't evolve, I'm accounting for everybody, if you don't evolve, you will perish because everything is in a state of change. Now, there are so many different brands out there that didn't start out being what they are. I think the most famous example that they gave was that IKEA started out as a pencil manufacturer, and now it's known for its functional Swedish style furniture because IKEA developed with the times.
Yeah, we call that in my class reframing. Like you're reframing your purpose. So instead of, we use Netflix as the prime example, that what they started out as a mail-in DVD service, trying to be ahead of the times, and then creating a streaming opportunity in almost a very unique and forceful way. There's a backstory to how Netflix was founded. I recommend other people look it up because I shouldn't be talking about it because it's definitely a story.
You know, it is. That's yet another example, the Netflix and how it evolved with the times. And to the point you made earlier about Netflix, Blockbuster was given the opportunity. Blockbuster Video, if anybody's old enough to remember, which I'm going to assume not everybody is a Gen Xer, was a place where you used to go. If you wanted to watch a movie, you would go there on a Friday night or a Saturday night. You would go to different sections and you would pick the movie you would watch. You would then get about 2 or 3 days. You would have to return it on time, and you would have to return it rewound because it's a VCR, or you would get charged an additional fee. Blockbuster was given the opportunity to move into Netflix's space and become part of their, at the time, mail-order DVD club, and Blockbuster said no. We see how well that worked out, which that goes back to the theory of evolution that I talked about before. If you don't evolve with the times, you will perish. I started out as a journalist in print media. The real estate that you got in your column was your key. Long form media, long form interviews. If you were working with a newspaper weekly, you got once a week to get everybody's attention. And if you were working with a magazine, you got once a month. When I was the editor of Latin Trends magazine, I had once a month to tell everybody everything that was going on in Latino and Hispanic culture, specifically in and around the New York City area. And I had their attention for a full month. You had a whole month to go get the publication. You had a whole month to digest it, to look at the photos, to see what all was going on. This was right at the cusp of when the digital revolution really first started. So I knew at that time that websites were starting to take up major real estate, that social media was on the rise. At that time, the dominant platform was MySpace because Facebook was just for college kids. And I had told the publisher at the time, if we don't jump on this, this will perish. And you have such a great magazine. And it really was. It was written in English and Spanish. It featured celebrities like Romeo Santos of Aventura, Bad Bunny before he was famous, Ramon Rodriguez before he was Will Trent. I'm talking, we were breaking some of the biggest Latino stars of the time who hadn't quite crossed over the mainstream. And I just sit here to this day and I think about, what if we would have evolved with the times? We could have been at the forefront of something great, because there's Latino culture, there's Latino American culture, and there's American culture. We spoke to that sweet spot of Latino American culture. First generation Latino kids, you know, their parents were immigrants, but they were born here. They spoke Spanish at home, but they spoke English on the streets. They were familiar with telenovelas, but they also had one finger on the pulse of American culture, hip hop, bachata, that sort of thing. But the publisher wouldn't hear it. He was part of that old brigade that said digital media
is for, it's not us.
Right. It's not us. It's too young. It's a passing phase. Do you know, just to jump back a little bit in my career, when I was in undergrad at Duquesne University, I wanted to intern at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette because that was the newspaper record. And at the time, all I had to my name in credits was a couple of columns in the Duquesne Duke, which was our local college newspaper. I had a little radio show every Sunday on WDSR while everybody else was in church, because of course. And I also had a couple of articles online on a website called In Music We Trust.
Oh my God.
And I looked and I was like, listen, I just really want to intern. And my biggest source of pride wasn't the radio show or the newspaper. It was what I had done online. And I remember the editor at the time looked at me and said, and this is a direct quote, to this day, I am now 47 years old and I am well out of Duquesne. I remember what he said to this day. The internet is not a serious place for journalism. You're not a real journalist if you publish online.
Where's he now?
Good Lord only knows, but obviously not relevant. But I say all this to say, and to land the plane, people from my generation and before could not have fathomed a time when the internet would be the dominant medium, when our stuff would be broadcast all over the world with just a click of a button. But in order for the Gen Xers to have remained relevant in today's market, they had to evolve with the times. And if they did not, they perished. So many of my colleagues who were super talented Gen Xers, I mean, I'm telling you, their stuff would make you sick with how good it was. It makes me sick to this day.
No, I mean, I know editor-in-chiefs of major magazines that were bumped because they did not have a social presence, because they were so focused. And it's so unfortunate, but they were so focused on the craft of putting out good content in print that they lost the opportunity to become a beacon of being worthy of followed. And it was so unfortunate seeing this seasoned person who'd been all over, had been to Paris, been to Italy, like done all these incredible things, been to Fashion Week hundreds of times, but neglected their own personal brand. And in doing so, like obsoleted themselves out.
Yes.
Which is just so unfortunate, because you have to, much like any brand, which I'd love this to be a segue, you have to have your foot or your hand in every platform, unfortunately, if you want to have any kind of real retail success. So go ahead.
Right. And to segue into that retail success, you don't have to compromise your brand authenticity to begin to come into that space. To give you an example in retail, Wendy's, okay? Wendy's as a brand before social media was cultivated as just one of the many in the fast food landscape. But with the advent of Twitter, which is now X, and which unfortunately is a dying brand because in its prime, Twitter was great, it developed its, young
voice.
Yes, that voice, that young, snappy personality with the clapbacks, as they say. And they opened up and they came into a whole new space. And why did they do that? Because they had an intern. They had the vision, the social media intern that had the ability to speak to that generation, even though all the C-level, execs were boomers and Gen Xers and to some extent millennials. But they had that foresight to say, well, we need an authentic voice, because can you imagine a boomer, meaning like people in my mother's age range who remember Woodstock, trying to get on Twitter and talk about, those clapbacks? To this day, I can't explain to my mother who the hell Felicia is when she hears "Bye, Felicia." So the point is they understood that they needed that authentic voice. So you can move into different spaces authentically, as long as the keyword is, I say this again, authentic, without compromising the brand, but by keeping a real voice.
So I couldn't agree with you more, especially with brands that are independent, that are desperate to try and break through the noise. And in my class, the term advertising is a dirty word because I treat it, and anytime it's in any of their homeworks, I always say they get points off, because I say for this entire semester, we will never speak about the term advertising, because that's budget, that's guaranteed, that's eyeballs, that's a return on investment. When you're starting a brand, 9 times out of 10, you don't have said budget. So it forces you to be clever and think out of the box and to be creative and to find your own voice and to really capitalize on who your true customer is and how to find them. Where do they hang out virtually? What do they watch? What do they read? What do they listen to? So it really puts brands into intense research mode, to like from ethnography all the way to, even empathy for what their customer is going through. I want to, just because you're saying about having a unique voice, how do you think this has impacted retail, at least fashion retail, within that space?
Well, to speak to fashion retail, I think that, again, certain brands become known for certain things. And when they try to deviate too far from it, going off of their authentic voice, they lose the impact. You get a perfect example is Nike, okay? Nike is in the athletic space. It's forever going to be in the athletic space. It's known for its sneakers, and the Jordans have an all but cult following, and they started to expand a little bit within the athletic space by starting to bring on weights and
for Skims, the partnership with Skims.
Yeah, and but see, even with their partnership with Skims, they remain within that authentic athletic place. If you're an athlete, if you're somebody who's like me that goes to the gym 5 days a week, you still want, your shapewear because you still want to look good in that cute little dress. But you're not going to go looking for Kim Kardashian in a fashion magazine. You're not going to read Vogue. You're going to read Women's Fitness. So Nike understands that. And so does Skims. So to reach somebody like me, they're going to partner with Nike, who's going to be in women's fitness, who's going to open it up and say, oh, okay, this is great. So they're still remaining authentic within their voice. Skims is not suddenly going into the athletic wear business, and Nike certainly isn't going into the intimate wear business. They're staying within their authentic brands. They're collaborating in a way that makes sense, and they're reaching new consumers. And I think that that's an important distinction.
Do you think Nike has lost their customer? Because I know a lot of people were saying recently that they have lost their way, and that Skims was a Hail Mary to try and to have more eyeballs coming to them.
I don't believe that that's 100% accurate. I do think that Nike isn't as popular as it once was, but that also can speak to the cyclical nature of fashion. There was a time that Adidas was the brand of all brands. There was a time that Reebok was the brand of all brands.
Oh my God.
Yeah. I told you I'm a Gen Xer.
Same.
So these are all things like that's the cyclical nature of just fashion itself. That, maybe Nike isn't, the brand that it used to be in terms of popularity, but it still has its devoted base. Anytime there's a new Jordan drop, you should see some of these sneaker blogs. You should see some of these sneaker social media sites that there's literally almost a cult around, Nike sneakers and specifically the Jordan brand. There are things that they talk about. It literally is like they're talking a different language because I'm not a sneakerhead.
Right.
Like, how in the world do you know all of these details about a damn sneaker? Like, what is the, like, what I see? I see a black and white sneaker, I see a green sneaker, and I see a solid sneaker. What in the hell is the difference between all these sneakers? But you ask a sneakerhead, they're devoted. Like, they will pay top dollar for these sneakers, $600, $700, $800. So maybe they don't have the volume, but they have the dedicated fan base, right?
So what do you think a brand could do to solidify their voice in order for someone like you to feel they're worthy of being covered? What do you look for?
Well, for Retail Wire, I specifically cover the business of fashion. Okay, I don't cover fashion per se. Quite frankly, I'm not a fashionista. I have never been a fashionista. I don't follow, fashion trends. I don't apply fashion trends to myself. If I like it, I wear it. If it looks good, great. And if it lasts longer, even better. But what I cover is the business of fashion. So in other words, is there an increase in numbers, an increase in sales? That's something I would cover. Is there a new product that they've never done before? That's something I would cover. A colleague of mine at Retail Wire, Lucille Barilla, she was the one who actually covered the Nike and Skims collaboration for the site because that was a new collaboration that they'd never had before. Anything that really focuses on the ins and outs and the day-to-day business of fashion, the boring part of fashion for those that are a bit more fashionistically inclined. Fashionistically, is that a word?
If you ever wanted to start a handbag line and didn't know where to start, this is for you.
Living proof that independent designers can make it big.
Emily Blumenthal is one prime example.
If you had dreams of becoming a handbag designer and didn't know where to start, this is for you. If you have a handbag brand and are in need of strategy and direction, this is for you. I'm Emily Blumenthal, handbag fairy godmother and handbag designer expert, and this is Handbag Designer 101, the masterclass. Over the next 10 classes, I will break down everything you need to know how to make, market, and manufacture a handbag. Broken down for you that you'll not only skip steps in that handbag building process, but also save money in that learning curve. For the past 20 years, I've been teaching at the top fashion universities in New York City, created the Handbag Awards, and also the Handbag Designer 101 podcast. I'm going to show you like I have countless brands from sketch to sample to shelf, whether you're just starting out and don't know where to begin, or even if you have a handbag line and just need some strategic direction, the Handbag Designer 101 Masterclass is just for you. So let's get started and you will be the creator of the next It Bag. Join me, Emily Blumenthal, with the Handbag Designer 101 Masterclass.
And I totally respect creating new words. That's my jam. I do it all the time. But in terms of being fashionistically covered, check plus with you on that. What are some of the latest retail trends that you see based on what you've covered recently? Because honestly, you see things and yes, it's numbers, but that's what people really need to be paying attention to because that's where the trends go. That's where the market's going.
Mm-hmm. What I've noticed most specifically in fashion, and speaking in general and not brand specific in this case, when I first started in, covering business, fast fashion was it. Temu, Shein, all of those apps that had like what they called fashion hauls online. Like these influencers would literally buy $300, $400, $500 box worth of fashion, and they would pull it out and they would literally get a season's worth of clothes out of there. But the problem was that this fashion was so shoddily made because it was about volume, that if it lasted even one washing, you were lucky. Because that is one thing that I notice. Even though I'm not, fashionistically inclined, check plus again, I do notice things like quality. I like good quality products. I like products. This sweater that's on my back right now is 7 years old. And you know what? It still looks good. It still makes me feel good. It is indicative of my personality. So I will still wear it. I don't care that it's not in fashion. I don't care that it's not on the cover of Vogue. But I do notice the quality of things. And what I would notice is that this material was very, very thin. And I knew that if it wasn't hand washed, and most people don't take the time to hand wash everyday clothes because this is not 1921, they would just throw it in the washing machine. Next thing you know, it would be rags that you would use to wipe the kitchen countertop. Fantastic. So what I've noticed is that over time, a lot of that fashion has fallen out of favor between the environmental impact that fast fashion has on landfills and the oceans and things like that. And Gen Z is very, very inclined and aware of those sorts of things. Between the fact that the actual value of the fast fashion wasn't there. Why would I spend $500 on these clothes that aren't going to last me a season when I could spend $25 on a good sweater that will still look good 7 years later? And that again is a numbers game. And also another thing I noticed is that because of what's going on in the economy today and, the crazy politicians are, throwing tariffs here, there, and everywhere. And when there's so much volatility in the market, all of a sudden, maybe getting stuff from China doesn't sound like such a good idea because who the hell knows, A, when it's getting over here, B, if there's not going to be a tariff on top of it, and C, you may as well buy someplace else if that's what you're going to do. So what I'm noticing is that a lot of people are trending towards, again, quality. They may not be necessarily seeking out high fashion. They're not going to spend $1,000 on a sweater to work from home. That makes no sense. And it also doesn't make financial sense if you're not in a position where $1,000 sweater is in your budget. But they are looking for things that are, like I said, quality. If I spend $25 on a sweater and it still looks good 10 years later, I'll keep it. That is also a very European mentality. As you might have guessed, I'm the product of two immigrants. I was born, here, but my parents were not. And they very much passed down that European mentality to me. What is wrong with that sweater? If it has a hole, take a needle and thread and fix it. Don't
fix it.
Right? Exactly. So there's a lot more value, like I said, the bottom line is placed on quality in fashion rather than quantity.
Have you noticed two things? One, quote unquote, vegan leather, which is really PU or polyurethane or PVC, which isn't really used polyvinyl chloride versus leather. Have you noticed people veering towards one versus the other, at least in terms of what you're covering? And if not producing in China, where have you seen other people going as an alternative to China?
Well, one thing I will say is that vegan leather, as it's known now, is certainly not a new concept.
No.
I've been wearing, pleather, as we used to back in the day.
It's all about packaging, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. I remember in the early 90s wearing a pair of pleather pants.
Yep.
Because I was in my peak rock and roll era. And, actually in the late 90s in college, I was a full-on goth, okay? So the pleather
Look
with
at
the
you.
black makeup, I got pictures. Girl. But the pleather and the black makeup and the Nine Inch Nails music was just there. But what I have noticed is that the quality of the pleather, the vegan leather, the PVC, whatever the hell you want to call the material, has gotten a lot better in recent production to the point that the untrained eye cannot tell the difference. Back then, you definitely could.
Right.
What I noticed too is that, which also will answer your question about alternatives to China, is that if people aren't seeking out leather, whether it's because of environmental reasons, personal beliefs on animal welfare, or a question of budget, they will go to secondhand shops to find it.
The circular economy, and here
Correct.
it is.
Yeah, I've noticed even to further, show the evolution and the reframing, as you put it. Goodwill used to be a place where you used to just dump, your garbage clothes. But now I've been even seeing on a social media trend on TikTok, because I follow the older side of TikTok, the Gen X side of TikTok. And I've been seeing that what's become a big trend is that a lot of people go into what they call upcycle fashion. So like they'll see like a leather coat from the 1990s. They'll, tailor it to their specifications. And these kids are so talented. Let me tell you something. It's not just about sewing a hole. They actually will sit there. They will measure it. They will tack it in. They will specify it to their specific. I'm telling you, these kids are talented. So, and they would take it in and they would do it and they would customize it and give it a more modern feel for just really a little more effort and a whole lot less money than if they were to buy it new off the rack from, say, a designer brand. So that is one thing that I have noticed that is a viable alternative. And, to reiterate your term, circular economy, I think that can only be good economically speaking in the long run for us as, in the United States, because no matter who's in office at the time, dependence on too much of one thing is never a good. If all we're doing is importing but not exporting, it's a problem.
Right.
If all we're doing is exporting but not importing, that's also a problem. So It needs to be that balance. And if for now, at least, we can keep things circular and do a lot of upcycling and that sort of thing, at least it will keep us baseline in the long run.
No, I couldn't agree more. It's just so interesting in terms of, I read this book in business school. It's by Paco Underhill. I think he's since retired, but I know his company's still around. I think it's called, his term, retail anthropology, explaining the science in which and how we shop. And like the fundamentals, again, this was a long time ago, but the book still stands. When you walk into a store, people go counterclockwise. So you should set your retail environment or any kind of merchandising, making sure knowing people are going to start on the right and work their way to the left, and how many items people can physically digest when they're looking at it. Too many versus too few. 5 is usually enough. How much can we really take? How much are we really looking for? What can you put at the checkout counter? And I've had to, and I'm sure you know this, how real estate in any kind of retail environment is paid for. Like, you want a better spot at the register, that's paid for. People aren't putting this stuff by the register just because they're trying to be nice or they don't know where to put it. They know that that's the last minute spot for a potential spontaneous purchase. That's where I'm going to put it.
Exactly. That's where in grocery stores you get, all the packs of gum and all the candy and all the tabloid magazines are right at the checkout line, because it's like, well, hey, I'm tired from shopping. I think I'd like a piece of candy or I'd like a piece of gum. Or, you'll be reading the tabloid magazine while you're waiting for the person in front of you to check out, and okay, whatever. And then you just toss it on top so that it equals purchase. And further to your point about going counterclockwise in a store, that's also why grocery stores put their vegetables and their fruits first thing in there, and they make it so aesthetically pleasing. All the pretty colors, and it's like, ooh, wow, look at that. And so it naturally draws you in. And retail does that as well. Retail shops do that too. The new fashions, the things that are higher priced, just off the runway, that sort of thing. The things that will be a premium, those you'll see first, which will entice you to go throughout the store. And then the sale stuff is more in the back, which is, where you'll go if...
Yeah, you got to hunt for it.
Right. Exactly.
No, I have this conversation with my students, and because I teach this class over and over, I have to remind myself that the semester before didn't hear the conversation that I just had, or the new semester doesn't know what I spoke about last semester, but we have this conversation, why are bras on the top floor and why are men's so close to the ground floor, and what's the why of all of that? And again, going back to retail anthropology, people say, oh, for bras, people want privacy. Yes, that's fair and well. But if you need a bra, you're going to travel. You will go to the tippity top. You won't think twice about going up, up, up. Men will not travel. It needs to be on the ground floor. It needs to be adjacent to beauty and fragrance and makeup, because either the woman is shopping for the man or the man and the woman are shopping together, and he doesn't have the bandwidth to spend that much time looking and shopping. So when setting up and how you merchandise, you have to take all these things into account and don't assume your customer is going to want to find you or get on that wait list. They don't care. They will forget about you and move on. Everybody and everything is replaceable. Mm-hmm. So I think brands need to keep all that in mind when creating, growing, and building who they are, especially to their customers.
Correct. They absolutely do. And I think, too, again, this also ties back to our earlier conversation about authenticity. If you understand the logistics of retail anthropology and you understand the mindset of the consumer, you can tailor your brand to that consumer, to that desired consumer, without compromising your authenticity. So that all is part of the larger ecosystem of fashion retail. Absolutely. It's not as easy as I have a shirt line or I have a fashion line or I have a shoe line. Let's go to market. And I think that, if I were to sum up the one thing that your students could take away from either this conversation or just your class in general, it's this. It's not as easy. The creative part is the easy part, even though they think that's the most difficult part. That's the easy part. Your idea, bringing it to market is another thing entirely.
Can I ask you, before we wrap up, in order to be worthy of someone like you to cover or have it end up in an article relating to the business of fashion, what do you look for in a brand and a company that make it worthy of a story? Because I think that that's a question we get a lot.
For me, in addition to looking for the authenticity, because as I tell people all the time, and you'll have to excuse my language in advance, I know I'm being bullshitted.
Mm-hmm.
I've heard it all. I've been in this game 25 years. I started out in entertainment journalism and print journalism, okay? If you think I haven't heard every line of bullshit ever invented by man, and still some that are being developed as we speak, I got a bridge to sell you. So in addition to looking for that authenticity, I'm looking also personally for the unique angle. One of the things that enticed me to work with a now former client on their fan convention was the fact of their authentic story. They had a real, when we think of all American, pull yourself up by your bootstraps type of the story, this was them. It was three dudes from three different parts of the country that had never met each other in real life, that all loved the same thing in pop culture, and decided to create a fan convention. Now, if that is not and they were in everyday life, they were total schlubs. They were total working men. But see, that's something that I like. I don't want to know about the trust fund baby, whose grandfather invented air. I don't want to know about, the rich heiress who got bored after, the husband divorced her and left her for the 20-year-old secretary and got a nice settlement, who then decided to found a cookie company. I don't care about that. You know what I care about? I care about the Latin kid that his parents came here with little more than the shirts on their backs, and he created an empire. Everybody loves his stuff. You know what I care about? I care about a woman that looks like me, that went against all odds and went against all common sense and was just crazy enough to believe that her idea worked and was humble and just worked hard along the way. That's what I look for. I look for stories that speak to the real American experience. The trust fund babies don't speak to the American experiences. The rich heiresses don't speak to the American experiences. People like you and me, people like the first generation immigrant crate. That's the American experience. When you make something out of nothing, that's incredible to me. That's what I look for in a story.
Mm-hmm. Man, Bernadette, I am jazzed up. I'm ready to submit my own story. This has been absolutely amazing. How can we find you, follow you, and get more of your amazing journalistic, fashionistic content?
Well, in addition to finding me on Retail Wire and on Dear Media, you can follow me on Instagram. I am BG_takes_pics, Pics. So BG takes pics. Right. And I am Bernadette Giacomazzo on TikTok. You're going to assume you're going to spell it at the beginning for the folks. Yep. So just my name on TikTok. And on Blue Sky, I am BG Writes, WRITES stuff, STUFF. So BG Writes Stuff, BG Takes Pics.
Okay. And for
I really
everyone,
fought hard for these.
and for anybody who wants to find Bernadette, it's Giacomazzo, Giacomazzo. There we go.
Ma'am. Right.
I'm not going to lie.
My
I'm reading it
parents
right
didn't
here.
leave a letter out when they named me. I'm telling you.
Oh my God. There's no you. I just saw that. Thank you so much. Oh, there you go. Thank you so much for joining us. This has been awesome.
Thank you for having me. Yes, it has been.
Thanks for listening. Don't forget to rate and review and follow us on every single platform at Handbag Designer. Thanks so much. See you next time.